All right, so this video is talking about all things cost plus. We're going to have a look at how these jobs get set up and how the markup works upon setup. We'll have a look at the fundamentals of just how cost plus jobs operate within BuildExact. We'll talk about creating the invoices for the customers, as well as the display options for those invoices, including things like showing more or less detail or adding more notes, that kind of thing. Now, to start this off, I'm actually going to go back to an estimate, which is this one. And I'm going to talk about the creation process from estimate to job for cost plus projects. So when I go create job and I select cost plus, first thing it asks is, what is the cost plus percent? What it's wanting to know is, at the time of invoicing to the customer, what is the default markup we're applying to things? So it's not to say that if I put 20% here, I can't vary it later. I absolutely can, especially in the case where you might be doing something at cost to help the client out, or could be anything. 20% is just the default, and I can absolutely change it per invoice line later. The other piece of context here is this 20% cost plus markup that I'm putting, as opposed to the markup that was originally on the estimate. So when I put the estimate together, I had markup in it, obviously, and I had that in there to give the client a realistic figure of the cost to complete this project. When we grab an estimate and take it into a cost plus job, we actually only are reading to this total, which is to say we're bringing all the line items in, but we're bringing them across to the job pre-tax and pre-markup, because as we go and invoice for everything, we're adding subsequently the markup and the tax. As kind of a side point to this, in an estimate, if you know ahead of time, and hopefully, ideally you do, that's the best scenario, if you know ahead of time that it's going to run as a cost plus job, it is much simpler to do this markup down the bottom and just have a one line total percent markup, because when it comes to invoicing, you can put that same percentage in and you don't really have to think about it beyond that. Everything will just get default 20%. If you do go down the path of doing markups per item or even per category, it's not the end of the world. You just need to be more conscious of what was the different markups that you put into your estimate when you're going through and doing the invoicing to the customer. So with that covered, let's go into a job that I've set up as a cost plus contract already and cover the kind of fundamentals of how do cost plus jobs work in BuildExact. Now, everything with the exception of variations and outgoing invoices is 100% the same for the different job types. For cost plus projects, I've mentioned in the variation video, and it'll go into more detail than I will here, that variations in cost plus contracts, because we don't have this idea of a fixed contract value, variations are used a bit differently, and they're used in a way generally where you're outlining the cost of something to a client if they're wanting to change the project. But as far as the actual payment of expenses, including those that are started from variations, all of the invoicing to the customer is just a result of the purchase orders and work orders. So that's to say, unless you tell us you've spent money on purchases or work orders, there will be nothing to invoice to the customer. Adding to this point, and this is more just a word of caution, I generally recommend people to kind of talk people out of putting this manual actual total in here anyway. Although it is possible. The main reason I talk people out of it is I think it's poor practice. I think you should do it through a purchase order or a work order, but especially for cost plus jobs, because this figure that I've typed in isn't formed by a purchase or a work order, it actually won't show up in your invoicing. Now, if you suspect you may have done this in a project already and you want to go back and check, the simplest way to do it is click on the show details down the bottom right, and anything that's listed as other is indicating that something's been manually typed in. As you can see, there's a total for purchase orders and total for work orders. Those are the ones we want. In a cost plus job, really other should always be zero to avoid scenarios where you miss billing for things. Awesome. So from there, one extra point specific to work orders and notes. When I'm putting work orders together, especially if I'm using the Build Exact timesheet app or Deputy or even QuickBooks Time, a lot of those will put notes that were made on the timesheet into this instructions box. So I want to talk about this box here and the instructions, how we use it, as well as this description up the top and how we use that. So for cost plus contracts specifically, we take this description that you had on your purchase order or work order and we take it to the invoice. So the intent is, if this was, in this example, a timesheet for a specific week, putting in details allows the client to understand which timesheet that is. If it was material, having things like, timber for framing or something like that allows some context to go to the client. The instructions, that adds kind of a secondary level of detail. I've already mentioned how it comes in automatically in some cases from timesheet apps, but when I get to the invoicing, I'm going to show where both of these different bits of text go and how they can be used. So let's save that. Let's go through to outgoing invoices and a couple of tips here. So these different statuses here allow you to filter through the invoices kind of based on where they're up to. The first invoice, everything's just going to show on all and you can tick all of them and add them to an invoice. If you have cost plus jobs that are running for quite a while, which some of them definitely do, personally, I really like the not invoiced status as opposed to all, because what will happen is all will be every expense on the job to date, and not invoiced is just picking up the ones that I've added in, say, the last week, 2 weeks, and I can bulk select them to push them into an invoice. So just a note that I personally find this easier. For now, it's the first invoice. It doesn't make a difference which one I pick. I'm going to grab all of those and go invoice, and it pulls them all in. Note that each of these are expandable, so you can get a sense of, what are all the totals, where is it all coming from, etc. You'll also notice it puts in my 20% markup by default, but if I need to change it to whatever, I can absolutely do that. Now with cost plus invoices, depending on how you're billing to the client, you might be going, hey, every 2 weeks we pass an invoice to them, or every month. So just naming them accordingly is helpful. I might say August invoice, and that's enough because I'll be doing this on a monthly cycle. If you want to add additional comments, absolutely go for it. I'm going to just put notes here so you can see where that goes. And I'm going to go save and close. Although as in other videos, I've mentioned save and send is also an option where it sends it immediately. There's one more step and then it sends it immediately. Save and close for when you're getting kind of used to this is easier because it allows you to go and preview the invoice and see what's on it. A question I get quite commonly is, hey, there's 3 print buttons and 3 share buttons. Which one do I click? And the answer is, it doesn't really matter. So the way I found it easiest to read this is, if I'm looking at these columns here, these ones are all specific to the various expenses. And you can see the order numbers and the notes, etc. That compared to these columns, these ones talk to the invoice number that each item is assigned to, the invoice description and the invoice status. All of those are the same because in this case, the invoice I've got it against is all August invoice. The status for that is the same, whichever one I look at. And consequently, share and print, I can click any of these and it takes me to share or print that August invoice. So that's just an extra point that I find people sometimes get confused on. If we go into the settings up here, I'm going to print the invoice and then I'm going to talk about extra options and where things are showing up. So with all of the extra settings off, I'm going to print and it looks, once it does it, looks like this. It's a draft because it's still in a pending status. As with other invoices, once it's set to invoiced and received, the invoice will change and look a bit different. So in the kind of most basic view of this, we have the line items with the description that I put in. So that was the description in the top of the purchase order or top of the work order. And then it lists out who each thing was assigned to. In my example, everything's assigned to me, but in reality, you'd have like purchase order from Bunnings, work order from DNC Contracting, purchase order from wherever else. And it just gives context of where all the materials are coming from. I should note that given that people run this in kind of different ways, some of our users do share all the receipts and invoices from the suppliers and contractors to their client. And if you're going to do that, then think about presenting this in a way where there's a consistent like purchase number or supplier name or something that makes it easier for the client to look at this and then look at those documents and see which one's which. Which kind of leads me on to the next options. I'm going to say show cost plus breakdown. The difference versus the one we just looked at is for each of these lines, if there's multiple lines against one of the work orders or purchase orders, it'll show all the lines. So it literally breaks down each of the orders. And then the other option is showing the order instructions, which was my point when I was looking at the work orders and what would transfer across. So I'm going to turn both of those on and print again. And you can see it's way more detailed. So the two things we've added were I had some notes on the purchase order, and I had some notes on the work order. You can see that especially for the timesheet, this is quite useful because it just talks to the client about what the work's actually including. Now you can pick and mix to see which one you like best. So if I go back to not having it broken down, but I leave the instructions, it'll show different again. And it shows just more like that with the notes and a simple view of what it was and which supplier it was. Awesome. Now that covers, I suppose, the different ways we can present it. One bonus point, and I've mentioned this in other videos around the fixed price or contract price invoicing, as well as completion percent. If you go and share a invoice, it will want to know, what are we sending? Is it the invoice, the statement, or both? For cost plus contracts, I still see value in, where is it? That one there, the invoice statement. Mainly, however, because the invoices just get generated week on week, month on month, this is mainly just good as a track of what's been billed to date. So first invoice, it's not going to be very exciting. There's not much data here. But as you get, a week, a month, potentially even up to a year into the job, this will have a really good history of what was billed for each total, and then the client can compare that to the invoice if they need to. Perfect. Hopefully that helps you out. Hopefully it makes sense. As always, any questions, let us know, and have a good day.